Hi, welcome. My name is Dan McCluskey, and on this video, I'm going to be going through the process of training with Coco, which I'm going to call Coco's journey, to help to illustrate what makes the system of training really special, what sets it apart from other systems, but also at the same time, as I go through the process with Coco, who's here ultimately for service dog training, and she's here a little earlier than that because she's holding a lot of control in the relationship. But as we go through this journey, I'm going to be offering a lot of tips, a lot of information regarding not just focusing on this system of training, but again, offering a contrast regarding relationship, understanding depth of relationship, and understanding how to make sure relational change happens between dogs and owners. Now here with Coco, again, Coco and I we're on week 2. She's doing really good considering she's holding a lot of control in the relationship. But here the really first question is, what is dog training? What's the process? Understanding how do you actually create positive change in the relationship. And the thing to really understand is about that very thing. It's about understanding dogs as social relational animals. It's understanding there's depth to relationships. So it goes beyond just applying a superficial narrative. And again, when I talk about this very common, very popular way of approaching training as a type of learning-based exercise, that presents a major problems for many, many people based on how it's applied. Okay, based on not really getting a sense of what's going on with dogs. Again, when you're experiencing behavior issues with your dog, they already have control in the relationship. So behavior issues are what's a result of it. It's control issues that are manifesting in various ways. And so, as you're needing help with your dog, professional help, and you step into a process and you approach it as trying to get the dog to respond. So very popular, like use a treat, or even, believe it or not, reward itself based on what's been established in the relationship becomes a problem, because again, it's about depth. Understanding dogs will move around, but that doesn't mean that good things are happening. It doesn't mean that relational change is happening based on how it's framing up. And a good example to really use is it's the same context of understanding the depth of relationship when you're dealing with, say, with a behavior issue with a child, and between parent and child. And the child's getting very selfish. There's a lot of things happening in the relationship, and you get a professional that comes and tries to help you out, and they approach it. They apply a very superficial, similar type of reward-based system, where it's not really focused on investment, depth of relationship. They're just using, say, treats, or in the case of a child, they're using, say, they could use any sort of a reward system. It could be an Xbox game or whatever the child wants. So the child's doing your laundry list of things that you want the child to do that represents at a superficial level to someone that's just looking at it that way, change. The grades are coming up or whatever it is. But again, because of how it's applied, okay, change isn't really happening. You're just doing the things so they can get whatever it is that they want. Because they're already selfish, okay? So you have to go deeper. There has to be a deeper level of investment. You have to be interacting in different ways. You can't just apply it that way. And that's what's happening really in the dog training world. There's a superficial application of this reward type of incentivized roadmap, and it leads to problems because I have Coco moving around in here on video and making it look absolutely fantastic in this training environment as she's doing a sit and doing all the typical type of stuff that you see, and it'd be a total washout. She's just doing the stuff because I'm not changing. Okay, and dogs are amazing animals. They know the difference. They know whether or not the person is actually coming into what I call right relationship. Okay, whether or not the person is actually beginning to the process is framing up in such a way the person is actually advocating the right way to change the perceptions of the dog. So it's all about changing the perceptions of the dog. Dogs pivot that way. Okay, they're pack animals. And so it's amazing because it's a shared connection. It's a social connection that is shared with the human But again, we have to follow nature's path. That's the thing to understand. But here's the thing, is again, there's so much deception in this whole picture problem. And I talk about that a lot in some other videos. But then the question really becomes, well, people get really, they get kind of invested in this way of thinking, and it's really hard to see anything else. And so you as a dog owner, or even if you're a trainer, you could even be a treat trainer, it doesn't matter. My goal is you're going to get a lot of information out of these videos. It's really going to help you maybe understand a little bit deeper here as to how this frames up, to make sure you're not just painting a picture superficially. And this is very common, is for the dog owner to go home with their dog only to find that this is disconnected between what you see in the training environment or certain interactions and unwanted behavior issues, because the control issues are still manifesting. Relational change has not happened because of how that was applied, because it shifts the focus. Understand, when you do that, you change the focus away from the person changing onto the dog. Okay, so there's certain things here to consider as you start to apply a method. And here I'm going to show you, I'm going to talk about some things in this video, just some simple stuff here, help people understand. Now, a lot of things people will say, well, Dale, because I'll focus on a flat collar, people will typically say, well, for really powerful dogs and big dogs, how do you possibly control a dog with a flat collar? Well, they're right. This is why the go-between tool here is a pressure collar. It's called a choke chain. This is on Coco, okay? But it's a go-between tool. So here, the context of using a device such as this, it's not your typical crank and yank. Just understand. This system, okay, how influence is applied, it follows within the parameters of what's reasonable, but also how it ties in to the method in a proactive way. So there's depth here. So therefore, the influence stays ahead of the curve of the mind of the dog. And we'll talk about that. But the ability to be able to use a flat collar and be successful comes to depth of relationship. It comes to how you're, how you're interacting with the dog and how you're beginning to affect change through how the method ties in. Okay, so again, it's all about, but again, the issue here too is about investment. So at the same time, it's about proper alignment and proper investment into changing the relationship. Okay, getting in the dog's head at a deeper level. Okay, otherwise, here's the problem. If you use, it's called a prong collar, so it has looks like a bear claw a little bit. But if you just go right away to that device and the dog and owner are stepping into the process and the dog's already holding control, and based on how that device is designed, the dog's going to respond to that device. And yes, the dog will respond and go into positions, but the dog can still hold control through that device itself. Okay, because the problem with it is because the device itself is manifesting influence, and it's not good. It's not proper alignment. It doesn't create a level of investment. Okay, through that owner to do certain things, certain ways. Okay, because the device is so powerful. Okay, the dog is going to respond to that, but the problem is it's not lining up. Essentially, the dog's saying, well, this isn't making sense. Sure, I'll respond to the device, but that person isn't really changing. Okay, just understand that's a big problem with certain devices. So, therefore, you want to strip everything down to a base level, just a flat collar. And, okay, the question is, well, powerful dog, do you use the pressure collar? Okay, the choke chain is called, but it's not, again, crank and yank. It's how it's used to control the dog. A dog that's really locking in and has a lot of control going on, locking in to get the dog into the staging area. We'll talk about that too, so I can begin to build my moments. Okay, so this is just kind of an in-between device at first. So for the first, say, 2 or 3 days, you want to have the ability, right, to control the dog. Some dogs have a lot of control going on. So of course you're not going to try to use a flat collar in that context because, yeah, it's good. You have to have a really high level of skill to do that. And what dog owners coming into the process just don't have yet. So again, you want them to focus on pressure collar. But here's the thing about it as a trainer. I'm going to talk a lot through these videos, so people understand. If I just switch over to this device based on my personality, because I have a certain way of thinking, it's leadership, and dogs really, they get a sense of that. Understand, dogs are relational animals. They get a sense of the kind of roadmap of your mind. So if I switch over to a pressure collar and start to work off that, I could trigger a moment of aggression with the dog very quickly. Okay, and that'll happen just from my personality. Okay, beyond using it, for me, going to a collar like that, okay, it can cause major problems because, again, it is about people. And so dogs really get a really good keen sense of your thought process, okay? They're social relational animals. So this is why people always will look at stuff and understand sometimes what's going on from the surface of things, because there's depth, okay, to what's going on. So again, flat collar is kind of like the main focus tool. But again, the question is, well, how do you use that? How am I able to use that? Because then people talk about tracheal pressure, okay? And not understanding that it's how it's used, okay? You're not into a situation where you're just keeping the dog under influence, okay? Influence, and the dog, and you're locked into a control situation, management situation. That's not how the tool is used. It's to create moments, okay? So you are tapping it, you're nudging it at certain times, right here. So you're nudging a little bit, and see how Coco's head lifts up, right? So because it's used differently, okay? Again, it's proactive, so it's ahead of the curve of the mind of the dog, okay? So if you wait, and again, if I'm like, look at things, applying influence like a correction, that represents your reactive, okay? You wait too long, and then of course I'm going to have trouble with flat collar because I'm in a whole different way of thinking, okay? Just understand that, when you get into a whole different way of thinking, that collar is going to be effective because I'm not thinking right to begin with, okay? So, and then I don't have depth, okay? Then I'm at a superficial level, and then likely I'm going to be applying maybe that narrative too. So here, really understand, it's about understanding relational context here, okay? So here, tap the leash a little bit, see that? So here, leash, just a standard leash. But it's all about how I think, it's how I apply influence, it's how everything comes together, it all intersects. And Coco understands. Okay, that's the thing, Coco understands. So here, the other thing too is, so here you talk about the difference between this system and others. This is interaction based, which means that I'm not asking Coco to go into position. I'm not using verbal commands initially, okay, until relational change happens. That is what adds value to the spoken words, the verbal commands. So here's the thing, based on what's been established, Coco already has control in the relationship. If you start using verbal commands, it lacks any meaning to it, okay, any value, because it's the same as, say, if you ever seen a parent in a toy aisle, I've been that parent sometimes, so trying to call a child out and counting to 10 and the child's at 11 on move, because it's about what's been established. Whereas, another parent just has to look in the toy aisle and little Johnny's coming out, right? That doesn't mean that parent has established that through abusing, okay, that child, okay? It's about, again, investment in relationship, okay? So understand. So no verbal commands at first because, again, it's about the intent of what you're doing. The dog already has the person pegged, okay, in a weak position. It's relational, or relationship. So through the doing part of it, through how influence is applied, the dog understands the intent because of how influence is applied, okay? Okay, so it's applied in such a way that, again, as I begin to assert pressure, so here, for example, okay, if I go from a sit position to a down position without saying the word, see, I'm just applying, see that influence is applying. Coco comes into agreement with that level of influence and the down happens. And then see, it has that drawing effect, much more than if I use the treat to do that, right? And, use the treat to influence her to go into a down, right? I still got the position, but it's not about the position. We talked about this thing about, response. Response isn't the be-all and end-all. It's context, okay? So we can get a dog to respond, but Coco still be holding control and have stinking thinking because she's like, sure, I'll do this for the treat. I'll do it just for the fact I have control. She'll do it just the fact that she has control to that owner. So it's so deep here that control itself, through what's established, becomes a problem by way if you start working off response that way without influence, without the method coming together properly, then it leaves these holes and gaps, okay? It's a superficial appearance-based type of picture that I'm creating, and because it's not going to line up. Okay, just like again my example, everything I say when I work off these examples of why it is that this roadmap breaks down for so many people, you can apply it into the human world. Just try to remember what I'm saying about a child and depth of relationship. Okay, it's all about relationship. So, but here the issue here becomes again is really you know, getting away from that way of thinking. Okay, but then because of what's been established in the dog training world, you know, people are so entrenched in this type of narrative, this type of try to reward the dog and do certain things that way. And even if I pet on Coco, okay, that's probably going to be a problem too, because that represents more control. Emotion and that petting and all that stuff ties in, it all becomes contaminated through the thought process of the dog, through what's been established in the relationship. So understand, all those things become problematic because it's context. And it becomes weak. It's just like no different than a child. A child sees a certain parent as the means to get whatever they want through that parent, right? It just, you know, it's like they're devaluing that. That's what's happening. Devaluing that person's not faded into in their picture. They don't connect properly. They don't see that person in the right light. Okay, it's the same as dogs. I mean, it's amazing, but again, very deceptive because, you know, if you paint a picture, you have a dog moving around here, that could look great and be totally disconnected from relational change happening. Okay, so that's another very important point. Now, the other thing is about influence itself. You know, how it ties together. It starts to set up what I call, so when you look at people talk about behavior modification, okay, you're talking about applying this, you know, narrative to, again, to build off this whole thing with response. It's an assumed. People are making assumptions about a dog's state of mind from the beginning, and this is where we talk about balance training even. I talk about these balanced dog trainers. You know, I want them to really understand this, and hopefully they will as they go through this whole journey of this, is that they're essentially doing the same thing, because when the dog and owner steps into a process, you have to really get to this understanding of why they're entering the process to begin with. Okay, that they have behavior problems. What do behavior problems represent? Okay, it's a relationship problem. They already have a relationship problem. Motives of the dog are already sideways. The dog's already holding control, a certain level of control. And here's the problem with this picture stuff, is that, you know, once you understand the problem with how things appear, even in the home environment, things can look really good. The dog can look balanced, okay? But only because the dog is gaining control, because it's context. So even here, I'm not letting Coco sniff the floor right there because it's context, okay? We're right in the middle of the process here. And so, you know, it takes on different meaning.